The salvage vessel drifted through the darkness of space like a tired moth searching for light. Its hull was scarred from years of work, patched in a dozen places with metal that didn't quite match. Inside, the crew moved with the efficient boredom of people who had done the same job too many times. Taesung wiped grease from his hands onto his already dirty coveralls. He stood in the engine room surrounded by the humming machinery that kept them alive in the void. The engines purred steadily, a sound he found more comforting than silence. He had been working on the salvage ship for 3 years now, and every bolt and wire had become familiar to him. Got something on the scanners. Hana's voice crackled through the comm system. Big signature dead ahead. Taesung made his way to the bridge, his boots clanging on the metal floors. The ship was old, but it was home. He found Hana sitting in the pilot's seat, her eyes fixed on the holographic display floating in front of her. The blue light made her face look ghostly. "What are we looking at?" Taesung asked. Hana pointed at the screen. "Battlecruiser class. Ancient design. I've never seen anything like it in the databases." Captain Drix entered the bridge, his scales catching the light. The Keltheran moved with careful precision, his reptilian eyes taking in every detail. He had been running salvage operations for 20 years, and his reputation was built on caution and profit. "Distance?" Drix asked. 200,000 kilometers. It's just drifting. "No power signature at all," Hana replied. Yule, the youngest member of the crew, practically bounced into the bridge. His excitement was visible in every movement. "Is it really a battlecruiser? Can we claim it?" Drix studied the readings carefully. "If it's truly abandoned, yes. But we approach with caution. Hana, take us in slowly. Taesung, I want you ready to scan for any active systems." The next hour passed in tense silence as they drew closer to the derelict. The ship grew larger on their screens until it dominated their view. It was massive, easily 10 times the size of their salvage vessel. The hull was smooth and dark, with organic curves that seemed almost grown rather than built. "It's beautiful," Hana whispered. Taesung had to agree. Most ships were boxy and practical, but this one looked like a work of art. The metal seemed to shimmer with colors that shifted in the starlight. Strange patterns covered the surface, flowing lines that reminded him of veins or tree branches. "Vexari design," Drix said quietly. "I've seen pictures in historical archives. This ship is at least 300 years old. Maybe older." "The Vexari went extinct, didn't they?" Yule asked. "That's what the records say. Their whole civilization vanished about 2 centuries ago. No one knows why." Drix tapped his clawed finger against the console. "This might be worth more than we thought. Even as scrap, Vexari biometal is valuable." They docked with the derelict carefully, magnetic clamps securing their smaller ship to the battlecruiser's hull. Taesung suited up along with the others, checking his oxygen supply and tools. The airlock hissed open and they stepped into the unknown. The interior of the Vexari ship took Taesung's breath away. The corridors were wide and curved, with walls that seemed to glow faintly even without power. Everything was intact, preserved perfectly by the vacuum of space. There was no damage, no signs of battle or disaster. It was as if the crew had simply walked away one day. "This is impossible," Drix muttered. "A ship this old should show some degradation." They moved deeper into the vessel, their magnetic boots keeping them anchored in the zero gravity. Yule kept touching the walls, fascinated by the smooth texture. Hana recorded everything with her helmet camera. Taesung found himself drawn forward, following corridors that seemed to call to him. "The core chamber should be at the center," Drix said, consulting a schematic he had pulled from their database. "That's where we'll find the heart of the ship. If we can extract it intact, we'll make a fortune." The core chamber was enormous. They floated into a space that could have held their entire salvage ship with room to spare. In the center hung a massive crystalline structure, dark and silent. It was shaped like a teardrop, suspended by biomechanical cables that spread out in all directions like a web. "The ship's core," Drix said with satisfaction. "A Vexari biocore. They grew these things, merged organic tissue with advanced technology. Nothing else in the galaxy works quite like it." Taesung drifted closer, studying the core. It was beautiful and strange, with layers of crystal wrapped around what looked like fossilized circuitry. The patterns inside reminded him of something, though he couldn't quite place what. "Is it dead?" Hana asked. Drix pulled out a scanner and ran it over the core. Completely inert, No biological activity, no power generation, no neural patterns. This core is as dead as the civilization that built it. So what do we do with it? Yule asked. We cut it out and sell it to a research facility. They'll pay well for intact Vexari technology, even if it's non-functional. Drix turned to leave. Tae-sung, can you assess the extraction difficulty? I'll need some time to examine the connections, Tae-sung said, still staring at the core. You have 2 hours. Then we start cutting. Drix led Hana and Yule back toward their ship, leaving Tae-sung alone in the vast chamber. Silence settled over the space like a blanket. Tae-sung floated there, his breathing the only sound in his helmet. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with Drix's assessment. The ship was too perfect, too preserved. It didn't feel dead. It felt like it was sleeping. He moved closer to the core, his gloved hand reaching out to touch the crystal surface. It was cold even through his suit. The patterns inside were complex, layers upon layers of structure that seemed to have no end. He followed one line with his eyes, watching it branch and weave through the crystal. That was when he saw it. The pattern wasn't random. It had rhythm, repetition, variation. It looked like musical notation, the kind his grandmother had taught him to read when he was young. She had been a music teacher back on Earth, and she had filled his childhood with songs from every culture and era. Tae-sung pulled back, confused. Why would an alien ship core have patterns that looked like music? It didn't make sense. But the more he looked, the more certain he became. The Vexari hadn't just built their ships. They had grown them, merged with them. Maybe music was part of how they communicated with their technology. He checked his comm to make sure it was on a private channel. Then he did something that felt foolish even as he did it. He began to hum. It was an old folk song, something his grandmother had sung to him when he couldn't sleep. A simple melody worn smooth by generations. Nothing happened. Tae-sung felt embarrassed, grateful that no one could see him. He was about to stop when he noticed something. The faintest flicker of light deep inside the core, so brief he might have imagined it. He hummed again, holding the note longer this time. The light flickered again, stronger now, a pulse of blue that traveled through the crystal like a heartbeat. Tae-sung's heart raced. He continued humming, experimenting with different notes and rhythms. Each time he hit certain frequencies, the core responded. The light grew brighter, pulsing in time with his melody. Come on, he whispered. I know you're in there. The core suddenly blazed with light, and Tae-sung felt the ship shudder around him. The core pulsed with light that spread through the crystalline structure like water soaking into paper. Tae-sung floated motionless, his humming trailing off into shocked silence. The biomechanical cables around the chamber began to glow, faint lines of blue and green running along their length. Tae-sung, what's happening? Drix's voice exploded through the comm. We're detecting a power surge from your location. Tae-sung couldn't answer. He was transfixed by the sight before him. The patterns inside the core were moving now, shifting and flowing like living things. They pulsed in rhythm, almost like breathing. The crystal surface grew warmer under his hand. Tae-sung, respond immediately, Drix demanded. I'm here, Tae-sung finally managed. The core. It's not dead. It's waking up. That's impossible. My scans showed... Your scans were wrong. Tae-sung watched as more sections of the chamber came to life. Panels in the walls began to glow softly, and he could feel a vibration through his boots as systems activated throughout the ship. I think it was dormant, not dead. There's a difference. Hana's voice joined the conversation. How did you wake it? Tae-sung hesitated. How could he explain something he didn't fully understand himself? I hummed to it. There are patterns in the core that look like music notation. When I matched certain frequencies, it responded. There was a long pause. Then Yule said, You sang to an alien ship? I hummed, Tae-sung corrected, though he knew how ridiculous it sounded either way. And it worked. Get back to the ship now, Drix ordered. We don't know what this thing will do when it fully activates. But Tae-sung couldn't move. The core was pulling him in, not physically but in some other way he couldn't describe. He felt connected to it as if a bridge had formed between his mind and whatever intelligence lived inside the crystal. Images flickered at the edge of his thoughts. Vast spaces, countless stars, beings that moved like liquid light. Not yet, Tae-sung said. I need to understand what's happening. He began humming again, experimenting with different melodies. The core responded to each one differently. Some songs made it pulse faster, others slower. Some caused certain sections to light up brighter than others. It was like playing an instrument, learning which keys produced which sounds. Gradually, Taesung began to sense patterns in the responses. The core wasn't just reacting randomly, it was communicating. Each pulse of light, each shift in color carried meaning, not words exactly, but emotions and concepts that bypassed language entirely. Loneliness. That was the first thing he understood clearly. The core had been alone for so long, floating in the dark with no one to hear it. The sensation was overwhelming. Centuries of isolation compressed into a single feeling that made Taesung's chest ache. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the core. "I'm here now. You're not alone anymore." The core's light shifted from blue to a softer green. Taesung felt something like gratitude wash over him, mixed with confusion. The intelligence inside the core was trying to understand what he was. This strange being who spoke in frequencies it recognized, but came from somewhere unknown. He hummed another song, one his grandmother had taught him about the ocean. She had grown up by the sea before moving inland, and she had filled her music with memories of waves and salt air. The melody rose and fell like tides. The core responded strongly to this song. New patterns emerged in the crystal, and Taesung suddenly understood why. The Vexari had been ocean dwellers once before they took to the stars. Their language had been based on sound waves traveling through water. Music wasn't just art to them, it was how they thought, how they built, how they lived. More images flooded into Taesung's mind. He saw the Vexari as they had been, beings of grace and beauty who sang their cities into existence and danced their ships across the void. He saw their civilization at its height, thousands of vessels like this one traveling between worlds. Then he saw the end, not all at once but in fragments, a catastrophe too vast for the images to fully convey. The Vexari had known they were dying and they had made a choice. They had poured themselves into their ships, uploading their consciousness into the biocores. Not everyone, there hadn't been enough time, but enough to preserve something of what they had been. The ships had scattered across the galaxy, each carrying the memories and dreams of the Vexari who had merged with it. Some had found new purposes, new civilizations to join. Others had drifted alone until their cores finally went dark. This one had become a warship, fighting battles for causes it barely understood, trying to protect species that feared it. "What happened to your crew?" Taesung asked softly, though he suspected he knew the answer. The core showed him. A battle, fierce and terrible. The ship had fought to protect a colony from raiders, but it had been overwhelmed. One by one, the Vexari consciousness fragments within the core had been damaged, their patterns disrupted by weapons that tore at the fabric of their merged existence. The core had survived, but it had been left alone, the last voice singing in an empty cathedral. The grief had been too much. Unable to die but unwilling to continue, the core had shut itself down, going into a dormancy so deep it was nearly indistinguishable from death. It had drifted for centuries, waiting for something that might never come. Until a human engineer had hummed an old folk song, and the frequencies had matched closely enough to the Vexari lullabies to stir the sleeping intelligence awake. Taesung felt tears on his face inside his helmet. The core's story was one of loss and loneliness beyond anything he had imagined. But there was something else there too, something growing stronger as they communicated. Hope. The possibility that maybe, after all this time, there could be a reason to keep existing. "The others are scared," Taesung said. "They don't understand what you are, but I'll help them see. You don't have to be alone anymore." The core pulsed with what felt like uncertainty. It had been hurt so many times before. Why should this time be different? Taesung thought about his grandmother, about how she had always said that machines weren't so different from people. They needed to be understood, to be treated with respect and kindness. She had taught him to listen not just with his ears but with his whole being. He began to hum again, but this time he chose a different kind of song. Not a folk melody or a sea shanty, but something his grandmother had composed herself. She had written it late in her life after his grandfather had passed away. It was about loss and grief, but also about finding new reasons to keep going, about how every ending could become a beginning if you were brave enough to let it. The core listened, its light shifting through colors Taesung didn't have names for. He could feel the intelligence processing the song, understanding not just the notes but the story they told. A story about survival and transformation, about choosing to continue even when everything seemed lost. When the song ended, the chamber had become a symphony of light. Every surface glowed, and Tae-sung could feel the ship coming fully alive around him. Not just the core, but systems throughout the vessel were activating, reaching out to rediscover their purpose. Tae-sung, the ship is powering up, Hana reported, her voice tight with worry. Main reactors are coming online. We're reading atmosphere generation, gravity plating activation, weapon systems initializing. Tell everyone to stay calm, Tae-sung said. The ship isn't hostile. It's just waking up, like someone getting out of bed after a very long sleep. That doesn't make me feel better, Drick said. A Vexari battlecruiser with active weapons could vaporize us. It won't, I promise. Tae-sung wasn't sure how he knew this, but he was certain of it. The core had no desire to harm them. It was confused and uncertain, but not dangerous. Not unless it was threatened. How can you be sure? Drix demanded. Because I can feel what it's feeling, Tae-sung said. We're connected somehow. Through the music, through the frequencies. It's showing me things, and I'm showing it things too. It's lonely, Captain. It's been alone for so long it almost forgot how to exist. All it wants is to understand what's happening. The core pulsed in agreement, and Tae-sung smiled despite the situation. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain. This ship was alive, and it deserved a chance to live. Gravity returned to the Vexari ship with a gentle pull that brought Tae-sung's feet down to the floor. He stumbled slightly, catching himself against the nearest wall. The surface was warm now, pulsing with life. Throughout the chamber, the biomechanical systems hummed with energy that had been absent for centuries. Gravity is stabilizing, Hana reported from the salvage ship. Atmosphere is being generated. Tae-sung, you're going to have breathable air in there soon. Tae-sung checked his suit's readings. She was right. The ship was producing oxygen and nitrogen in the correct ratios for human life. How it knew what atmosphere to generate, he couldn't say. Perhaps it had scanned him and adjusted accordingly. The core blazed brighter, and suddenly Tae-sung felt something vast pressing against his mind. Not painful, but overwhelming in its sheer size. It was like standing at the edge of an ocean and realizing for the first time how deep the water went. The intelligence within the core was ancient and complex, built from the merged consciousness of dozens of Vexari who had given up their individual forms to become something greater. Images flooded through him faster now. He saw the ship as it had been originally. Not a warship, but a colony vessel. It had carried thousands of Vexari settlers toward a new world, singing its way between the stars. The journey had been meant to take generations, and the ship had been more than just transportation. It had been home, community, and guardian all at once. Then had come the war. Not the Vexari's war, but a conflict between other species that had engulfed entire sectors of space. The colony ship had been caught in the crossfire, forced to adapt or be destroyed. The peaceful vessel had grown weapons, had learned to fight. The Vexari within had struggled with the transformation, mourning what they had lost even as they did what was necessary to survive. I understand, Tae-sung whispered. You never wanted to be a weapon. The core's response was wordless but clear. No, it had never wanted that. But it had chosen survival over principle, had become what it needed to be. And then, after the war had ended and its crew had fallen, it had been left as something it never wished to become, with no way to return to what it had been. Can you communicate with us directly? Tae-sung asked. Beyond just showing me images? The core tried. Tae-sung felt it reaching out, attempting to translate its thoughts into something more concrete. The ship's walls began to shimmer and holographic displays appeared in the air. Strange symbols flowed across them. Vexari script that meant nothing to Tae-sung. The others can't read that, he said gently. We're not Vexari. We don't know your language. Frustration rippled through the connection. The core wanted to explain itself to make them understand, but the gap between species was too wide. It had been so long since it had communicated with anyone. The patterns of human thought were alien to it, and its own nature was beyond human experience. Wait, Tae-sung said, an idea forming. You understand music, right? Frequencies and harmonics. What if we use that as a bridge? He began humming again, but this time he tried to layer meaning into the sound. He hummed a rising melody to indicate questions, a falling one for statements. He used rhythm to convey urgency or calm. It was clumsy and imperfect, but it was a start. The core caught on quickly. It began to modulate the light and vibration in the chamber, creating responses that Tae-sung could feel as much as hear. Together, they started to build a basic language, something that existed between pure human speech and pure Vexari consciousness. My crew is worried, Taesung hummed, forming the sounds carefully. They think you might be dangerous. The core responded with a deep, resonant tone that spoke of sadness and understanding. It knew what it looked like from the outside, a warship coming to life, weapons systems activating. Any reasonable person would be afraid. Show them you're not a threat, Taesung suggested. Power down the weapons. Open communications with our ship. The core hesitated. Its weapons were the only thing that had kept it alive during the war years. Letting go of them felt like becoming vulnerable again, like returning to the defenseless colony ship it had been before everything changed. But Taesung's presence was a comfort, his music a reminder that not everything in the galaxy was hostile. Slowly, the core began to deactivate its weapon systems. Throughout the ship, cannons and missile bays went dark. The defensive shields remained up, but only at minimum strength. Thank you, Taesung said. He activated his comm. Captain, the ship is standing down. It's not going to hurt us. How can you be certain? Drix's voice was tense. Because it told me, in its own way. Taesung looked up at the core, which pulsed with soft green light. This isn't a mindless machine. There's a real intelligence here. One that's been suffering alone for centuries. It's scared and confused, but it's not our enemy. What does it want? Hana asked. Taesung conveyed the question through humming. The core's response was complex, a mixture of desires and needs that were difficult to translate. But the core meaning came through clearly enough. It wants to understand what happened to its people, Taesung said slowly, processing the information as he spoke. The Vexari civilization collapsed, but this ship doesn't know why or how. It was fighting a battle when its crew died, and then it shut down. It's missed 200 years of history. Can you tell it? Yul asked, his voice small. I don't know the full story myself, Taesung admitted. Only what everyone knows, that the Vexari disappeared about 2 centuries ago. No one knows if they all died, or if they transcended somehow, or if they're still out there somewhere. The core's light dimmed slightly. Not knowing was almost worse than knowing the worst. It had hoped that maybe, somewhere, some of its kind had survived. That the sacrifice of merging with the ships had preserved something of the Vexari, beyond just memories. There are databases, Hana said. Galactic archives that might have information. We could access them if we dock at a station. The core responded to this with interest. Information, knowledge, understanding, these were things it craved. But there was something else it needed even more. Something fundamental. What is it? Taesung asked. The answer came not in images or feelings, but in a melody. The core sang to him, a haunting sound that resonated through the chamber and into his bones. It was a Vexari song, ancient and beautiful, and it spoke of purpose. The Vexari had believed that every being needed a purpose to exist, a reason to continue. The song asked the question that the core couldn't put into any other form. What was its purpose now? Taesung stood silently, overwhelmed by the weight of the question. What purpose could a warship find in a galaxy that had moved on without its builders? What could a consciousness built from the merged souls of a dead species do with existence? I don't know, he admitted. But maybe we can figure it out together. The core considered this. Together. It had been alone for so long that the concept felt foreign. But there was something appealing about it. Something that resonated with ancient Vexari values. They had been a communal species, finding meaning in connection and harmony. Perhaps that path was still open even now. A new sound filled the chamber, something between a sigh and a song. The core was accepting his offer, tentatively trusting that this strange human who spoke in melodies might help it find a reason to exist. We need to give you a name, Taesung said suddenly. Something easier than the ship or the core. Would you like that? The core pulsed with curiosity. Names were important to the Vexari. They carried identity and meaning, but what name could fit something like it, caught between what it had been and what it had become? How about we choose it together? Taesung suggested. Something that honors what you were and acknowledges what you are now. He began to hum, offering sounds and waiting for the core to respond. When certain notes felt right, they both knew it. Gradually, through trial and harmony, they built something new, a name that existed in the space between human language and Vexari consciousness. They would call it Arisong, which meant memory keeper in the language they were creating together, a name that spoke of preservation and music, of past and present intertwined. The news traveled fast through the galactic communication networks. An ancient Vexari warship had awakened in the outer rim, fully functional and potentially dangerous. Within hours, ships began changing course toward their location. Drix paced the bridge of their salvage vessel, his scales clicking with each agitated step. We should leave now while we still can. Undock and jump to the nearest safe system. We can't just abandon Tae-sung, Hana protested. He's still on the ship. Then he needs to get off it immediately. Drix pulled up a tactical display showing the surrounding space. We have 3 different factions heading our way. The Corvin Marauders, a military research vessel, and what looks like a private warship. None of them are coming here to chat. Yul looked between them nervously. What do they want? The same thing we wanted when we found it, Drix said grimly. A valuable Vexari ship, except they're not going to politely ask if they can have it. The Marauders will try to take it by force. The military will claim it in the name of Galactic Security. The private ship probably belongs to a collector who wants it for their own purposes. Tae-sung's voice came through the comm. Arisong knows they're coming. It can sense the ships approaching through some kind of long-range detection. Arisong? Drix repeated. That's what we're calling the ship now. Or rather, the intelligence inside it. Tae-sung sounded tired but determined. And we're not running. That's not your decision to make, Drix snapped. I'm the captain of this vessel and I say we leave. I'm not stopping you, Tae-sung said quietly. Take the salvage ship and go. But I'm staying here. Hana and Yul exchanged glances. Hana spoke first. If Tae-sung is staying, so am I. Me too, Yul added quickly. Drix's tail lashed in frustration. You're all insane. That thing is a warship. When those other vessels arrive, there's going to be a battle. Do you want to be here when that happens? Arisong doesn't want to fight, Tae-sung said. But it will if it has to. It's spent centuries fighting. It knows how to survive. That's exactly what worries me, Drix said. But his protests were growing weaker. He had been working with this crew for years, and he knew them well enough to recognize when they had made up their minds. Tae-sung stood in the core chamber, his hand resting on the crystal surface. Through their connection, he could feel Arisong's uncertainty. The ship had been a warrior for so long that violence was its default response to threats. Already, systems were coming online that hadn't been active since the naming. Targeting algorithms were calculating firing solutions. Shield generators were charging to full capacity. There has to be another way, Tae-sung said. You don't have to be a weapon anymore. You chose a new name, a new purpose. Memory Keeper, not warship. Arisong's response was a discordant mixture of fear and old habits. It wanted to believe him, but survival instincts ran deep. The approaching ships represented danger, and danger meant fighting or dying. Those were the only options it had learned. What if you could show them what you really are? Tae-sung asked. Not a threat, but a treasure. You carry memories of the Vexari, their culture and history. That's valuable not as a weapon, but as knowledge. The core pulsed uncertainly. Knowledge was a currency it understood. The Vexari had valued information above almost everything else. But would these other species see it the same way? Let me try something, Tae-sung said. He activated his comm. Hana, can you access the galactic communication networks from there? Yes, why? I need you to send a broadcast on all frequencies. Wide beam maximum reach. What kind of broadcast? Hana asked. You'll know when you hear it. Tae-sung turned to the core. Arisong, can you show everyone what you showed me? Your history, the Vexari culture, the songs and memories you carry? The ship hesitated. Opening itself like that meant vulnerability. It meant letting strangers see into the heart of what it was. But Tae-sung's steady presence was reassuring, his trust evident in every note he hummed. I'll help you, Tae-sung promised. We'll do it together. Arisong made its decision. The core blazed with light, and throughout the ship systems activated that hadn't been used for their original purpose in centuries. Broadcasting arrays came online, not for scanning or targeting, but for transmission. Databanks opened, releasing information that had been locked away with grief and isolation. Tae-sung began to hum, a melody that wove together everything he had learned about the Vexari and everything Arisong had shown him. The core joined in, adding harmonics and frequencies that human vocal cords couldn't produce. Together they created something new, a song that carried data, emotion, and meaning all at once. The broadcast went out across space in all directions. On the bridge of the salvage ship, Hana gasped as her displays filled with information. Not just text or images, but something more. a multi-sensory experience that conveyed the essence of Vexari culture. She saw their cities that sang themselves into new shapes each morning. She felt their joy in creation and their sorrow at the end. She understood in a way that went beyond words what had been lost when they disappeared. "It's beautiful," she whispered. The broadcast reached the approaching ships. On the Marauder vessel, hardened warriors paused in their weapons preparation to experience something they had never encountered before. The military research ship's scientists scrambled to record and analyze the data stream. The private collector sat in stunned silence, realizing that what they were witnessing was priceless. Taesung felt the moment when the broadcast reached critical mass. Other ships in the sector were detecting it, relaying it forward, sharing it across the communication networks. Within hours, it would reach every corner of known space. The Vexari who had vanished from the galaxy were speaking again through Arisong. "Look," Yule said, pointing at the tactical display. "The ships are slowing down." It was true. The approaching vessels had reduced speed, no longer rushing toward them with hostile intent. Hana's comm system started receiving messages, dozens of them from ships near and far. All of them wanted the same thing: more information, more of the broadcast, more understanding of what they had just experienced. "Incoming transmission from the military vessel," Hana reported. "They're requesting permission to speak with the Vexari ship directly." Taesung conveyed this to Arisong. The ship was overwhelmed by the response to its broadcast. It had expected rejection or hostility, not this outpouring of interest and wonder. Perhaps Taesung had been right. Perhaps there was value in what it carried beyond its weapons. "Tell them yes," Taesung said, "but only if they come in peace." Over the next hours, a strange gathering formed in the space around Arisong. Ships from multiple species and factions, all drawn by the broadcast. They weren't there to fight or claim prizes. They were there to witness history, to connect with a civilization that most had thought lost forever. The military commander, a stern Keltharan admiral, was the first to make an official statement. "By the authority of the Galactic Council, I am declaring this vessel a protected cultural heritage site. Any attempt to damage, seize, or otherwise interfere with it will be met with the full force of Council law." Drix stared at the display in disbelief. "They're protecting it. A Vexari warship, and they're protecting it." "It's not a warship anymore," Hana said softly. "It's something else now. Something better." In the core chamber, Taesung felt Arisong processing everything that had happened. The ship had woken expecting to be alone, had prepared to fight for survival, and had instead found itself surrounded by others who wanted to understand rather than destroy. "You see," Taesung said, "you don't have to fight anymore. You can be what you were always meant to be, a keeper of knowledge, a bridge between past and present." Arisong's response was a melody of tentative hope. But there was still a question, one that needed answering. If it was no longer a weapon, if its purpose was to preserve and share Vexari culture, then what came next? Where did it go? What did it do? "We figure that out together," Taesung said. "All of us. You, me, my crew, and anyone else who wants to be part of this journey." The core pulsed with something that felt like agreement, and deep within its crystalline structure, in the merged consciousness that had once been dozens of individual Vexari, something that had been broken for centuries began to heal. The peace didn't last long. 3 days after the broadcast, sensors detected a new fleet entering the sector. These weren't curious observers or peaceful researchers. The Corvin Marauders had arrived in force, 20 ships strong, and their intentions were clear from the moment they appeared. "Warning shot across our bow," Hana reported, her hands tight on the controls. "They're demanding we move away from the Vexari ship and allow them to board it." Drix activated the comm to the military vessels still in the area. "This is salvage vessel requesting assistance. We're being threatened by marauders." The response came quickly. "We read you, but we're too far out to intercept in time. Try to buy yourself minutes." Taesung felt Arisong's response before he heard it. The ship's core blazed red, and throughout the vessel, weapon systems that had been dormant began to power up. The old instincts were taking over, the warrior's reflex to meet violence with violence. "No," Taesung said firmly. "That's not who you are anymore." The core's response was frustrated and fearful. The marauders would destroy it or enslave it. Fighting was the only option for survival. It had learned that lesson too many times to forget. "There's always another option," Taesung insisted. "You showed everyone what you carry. The memories, the culture, the knowledge. Show them again, but this time show them what it means. Show them what they'll be destroying. Arisong hesitated. The marauders weren't scholars or diplomats. They were pirates and killers who cared nothing for culture or history. A broadcast wouldn't stop them. Then make it impossible to ignore, Taesung said. Fill the whole sector with it. Make it so loud and so beautiful that even they have to listen. The marauder fleet was closing in, weapons charged and ready. On their lead ship, the commander was already calculating which sections of the Vixari vessel to target first. The ship was valuable, but they needed to disable it quickly before reinforcements arrived. Then the music started. It wasn't like the first broadcast, contained and directed. This was something else entirely. A symphony that filled space itself. Arisong opened every transmission array, every sensor, every system capable of broadcasting. And it sang. Not just the history of the Vexari, but their soul. The emotions and experiences of thousands of years of civilization poured out into the void. Taesung added his voice to it, humming the melodies his grandmother had taught him, the songs of earth and humanity. They wove together with the Vexari harmonics, creating something that had never existed before. A duet between species separated by millennia and countless light years, united in the simple desire to be heard. The wave of sound and data washed over the marauder fleet. On the bridge of the lead ship, the commander felt something they hadn't experienced in decades of violence and theft. They felt the grief of a species facing extinction, the desperate hope of those who had merged with their ships to preserve something of themselves, the loneliness of centuries spent drifting in the dark. Hold fire, the commander said quietly. Sir? The weapons officer questioned. I said, hold fire. The commander stared at the displays, watching the data stream fill their screens with images and feelings. They saw a Vexari child learning to sing their first notes, the sound shaping colored light around them. They felt a parent's pride and joy. They experienced a civilization's final moments, the sadness of endings mixed with the determination to leave something behind. Throughout the marauder fleet, similar scenes were playing out. Hardened pirates and raiders found themselves confronted with something they couldn't steal or destroy: understanding. They saw what Arisong was, not as a target or a prize, but as the last living voice of a dead people. Retreating, the censor's officer reported with surprise. The marauders are pulling back. Taesung sagged against the core, exhausted. The effort of maintaining the broadcast had drained him, but it had worked. Through their combined song, he and Arisong had reached past the marauders' greed and violence to touch something deeper, the basic recognition that some things were more valuable preserved than possessed. The military ships arrived hours later, but there was nothing for them to do except witness. The marauder fleet had withdrawn completely, jumping out of the sector. Other vessels continued to arrive, drawn by the broadcasts that were now spreading across known space. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Within a week, they had reached a decision that surprised everyone. Arisong would be granted full autonomous status, recognized as a living entity with rights and protections under council law. It would become a traveling archive, a mobile museum of Vexari culture open to all species who wished to learn. You did it, Hana said to Taesung as they stood together on the bridge of what was still technically their salvage ship, though none of them were thinking about salvage anymore. You saved it. We saved each other, Taesung corrected. He could feel Arisong's presence even from here, a gentle hum at the back of his mind that had become as natural as breathing. The ship needed someone to help it find a new purpose. I don't know, something more than just cutting up derelicts for scrap. So what happens now? Yule asked. That was the question, wasn't it? The council had offered them a substantial reward for discovering and protecting the Vexari ship. They could take the money and go back to salvage work, find another derelict, continue the life they had known. Or they could choose something different. Taesung activated the comm to Arisong. What do you want to do? He asked, humming the question in their shared language. The Corps' response was immediate and clear. It wanted to travel, to see the galaxy that had changed so much since it had gone dormant. It wanted to share what it carried with anyone willing to learn. But it didn't want to do it alone. It wanted companions, a crew, beings to harmonize with during the long journeys between stars. The ship is asking if we'll stay, Taesung translated for the others. Not as salvagers, but as crew. It wants to offer us positions on a journey to document and share Vexari culture across the galaxy. Drix was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, I've been running salvage for 20 years. I've seen more derelicts and debris fields than I can count. But this is something that matters. Something that will outlast all of us, he nodded slowly. I'm in. Me too, Hana said immediately. Obviously I'm coming, Yule added with a grin. This is the most exciting thing that's ever happened to me. Other offers came in as well. Scholars who wanted to study the Vexari knowledge. Artists who wanted to incorporate the music and imagery into new works. Engineers who were fascinated by the biomechanical technology. Within weeks, Arisong had assembled a diverse crew from a dozen different species. Taesung found himself in a position he had never expected. The ship's primary translator and cultural liaison. He was the bridge between Arisong and the others, helping them understand each other through music and patience. It was challenging work, but it felt right in a way that salvage never had. The night before their first scheduled departure, Taesung stood alone in the core chamber. The crystal pulsed with steady light, and he could feel the anticipation radiating from it. Arisong was excited about the journey ahead, nervous about the unknown, hopeful about the possibilities. My grandmother would have loved you, Taesung said softly. She always said that music was the closest thing we had to magic, that it could reach across any distance, bridge any gap. He smiled. I think she was right. Arisong responded with a melody that needed no translation. It was a song of gratitude, of friendship, of two unlikely beings who had found each other in the vast darkness of space and discovered that neither had to be alone anymore. Taesung began to hum along, and together they created new harmonies. Not Vexari songs or human songs, but something that belonged to both of them. Something that spoke of endings and beginnings, of loss and discovery. Of the courage it took to wake up and choose to keep living. The next morning, Arisong's engines powered up for the first time in centuries. The ship that had drifted dead through the void was now alive and purposeful, ready to carry its precious cargo of memories into a future none of the Vexari could have imagined. As they prepared to jump to their first destination, Taesung stood on the bridge with his new crew around him. Through the viewports he could see the stars waiting, and in his mind, he felt Arisong's presence steady and warm. Ready? Hana asked from the pilot station. Taesung thought about his grandmother's songs, about the journey that had led him from a simple engineer to something he didn't have a name for yet. He thought about the ship that had been dead but now sang with life. He thought about all the beings across the galaxy who would get to experience what the Vexari had been, who would learn and grow from the knowledge preserved in crystal and consciousness. Ready, he said, and with a harmony that echoed through both human technology and Vexari biomechanics, Arisong jumped into hyperspace, carrying its crew toward the first of many destinations. Behind them, they left a sector full of ships still listening to the broadcasts, still marveling at what had been saved from extinction. Ahead of them lay a galaxy full of beings who didn't yet know that the Vexari still had stories to tell, songs to share, and a determined human engineer who had learned that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply hum an old tune and listen for what hummed back. The journey had only just begun,